The Trojan War was a nearly 10-year-long battle told by the Greek epic poet Homer. It has been immortalized and retold through movies like Troy and the use of the iconic Trojan horse. Famous names in Grecian mythology are synonymous with the war, names like Odysseus and Achilles. But what was the point of this seemingly endless war, one which would have ended thousands upon thousands of lives? Who could have brought about such a horrific tragedy? One woman, Helen. She is known as Helen of Argos, Helen of Sparta, and she is pointed to as the #1 cause for the Trojan War. But how much of it was really her fault? Taking a look at various sources of mythology, we piece together the past of the most beautiful woman to walk the earth, Helen of Troy. It's said that Helen retained her eternal beauty from her godly lineage, and most sources say that she was, indeed, a demigod. Her father was the king of the gods, Zeus, though when Zeus and Helen's mother, Leda, met, he wasn't recognizable. Disguised as a bird, in most stories as a swan, he descended to earth after seeing the beautiful Queen Leda. Though some godly parents are known to make appearances in the lives of their children, after Zeus left Leda, he never reappeared to visit his daughter, and potentially other children he had with Leda at the same time.
There are a few different stories about Helen's birth, and none of them have been used enough to consider a single one to be factual. In some stories, it's said that Leda laid 2 eggs, and out of one came Helen and her brother Polydeuces. In the other were Castor, Polydeuces' twin, and Clymaestra, the sister of the 3. Others say Helen was an egg of her own, while Castor and Polydeuces, known as the Discuri, came out of the other together. In this version, Clymaestra was the legitimate daughter of Queen Leda and her husband, King Tyndareus.
Tyndareus knew that Helen was the daughter of Zeus, but raised her as his own. However, even with the love and support of Tyndareus, Leda became unable to deal with the lineage of her daughter and committed suicide. Much of Helen's childhood, we can assume, would have been like the childhoods of most Spartan children. Around the age of 12, however, she was kidnapped by the hero Theseus, who may have taken her for a political advantage, although many stories state the great warrior wanted to marry the child of a god. At the time of her kidnapping, though, Helen was too young for marriage, so he left her with his mother, Aethra.
Aethra essentially raised Helen to be a woman, but before Theseus was able to marry his stolen bride, her brothers Castor and Polydeuces stole her back. Somewhere between now and after the marriage of her sister Clymaestra, a girl named Iphigenia was born. It's unclear whether Iphigenia was born to Clymaestra and her husband, or if she was really the child of Helen and Theseus, given to Clymaestra to raise as her own. At this time in history, if it was thought that Helen had already had a relationship with another man, it would have ruined her chances at a good marriage.
And nothing was more important to King Tyndareus of Sparta than a good marriage for his most beautiful daughter, who was a useful pawn in the game of politics. Clytemnestra had already been married off to Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, in order to unite the 2 great city-states. To forge another alliance, Tyndareus decided to invite all eligible suitors for what was essentially a competition for Helen's hand. Over 45 men stayed and competed in Sparta for the prize of Helen, including the hero Odysseus and Menelaus, Agamemnon's younger brother. Wanting to strengthen the alliance with Mycenae, Tyndareus chose Menelaus, but was afraid of the wrath of the other suitors. Odysseus, wanting Tyndareus to support him in his courtship of a young woman named Penelope, concocted a brilliantly devious plan, the Oath of Tyndareus.
The Oath of Tyndareus states that, before a man was named as the winner of Helen's hand, all suitors would sign an oath promising to stand behind Helen's husband if ever the need arose. So they all reluctantly signed it, with Menelaus of Mycenae coming out on top, and Odysseus catching the hand of his true love, Penelope.
Menelaus and Helen were quickly wed and began their marriage without much of a wait. With Tyndareus growing old and eager to have a predecessor to the throne of Sparta, little time could be wasted. Out of their marriage came a daughter, Hermione, and according to some legends, 2 sons, Nicostratus and Cleisthenes. Her marriage with Menelaus was uneventful through a calm 10 years, and when Tyndareus abdicated, Helen and Menelaus rose to the throne.
The boring safety of Helen's marriage wouldn't last longer than the first 10 years, however.
From a distant land called Troy came the dashing Paris Alexandros, visiting Sparta on a diplomatic mission. Paris befriended Menelaus while also getting close to Menelaus' wife.
Basically, Paris Alexandros felt like he was due Helen. He had not long before meeting her dreamed he had attended a wedding where the gods and goddesses of Olympus were present. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite were in a heated argument over whom of the 3 was the most beautiful. The prize was a golden apple, and before he knew it, Paris was being asked to make the decision. To sway his decision, Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman alive for a wife. And unable to resist, Paris gave the apple to her. The moment Paris saw Helen when he came to Sparta was the moment he knew Aphrodite kept her promise.
Paris Alexandros seduced Helen and convinced her to come live with him in his city-state of Troy. Paris's father, King Priam, along with his mother, older brother, and the general population of Troy, were strongly against Paris and Helen's adulterous relationship. Against the wishes of all, Helen and Paris married, unconcerned about what was transpiring at home.
In Sparta, after Helena had abandoned her family to be with Paris, Menelaus had flown to rage. Agamemnon had initiated the oath of Tyndareus, and the 44 other suitors prepared with the soldiers from their city-states to wage war against Troy. It took months for the ships to head out for Troy, delayed by endless storms brought on by Artemis, who was angry. To appease her, Agamemnon ordered the sacrifice of his oldest daughter, who was potentially the daughter of Helena and Theseus, Iphigenia.
Enraged and distraught, Clytemnestra never forgave Helen for the death of Iphigenia. The Trojan War lasted 10 years, during which time blood was shed, people starved, and hope slowly faltered. Paris Alexandros, fighting for his love, went face to face with Menelaus on the battlefield in what should have been a fight to the death. When Paris had struck Menelaus down rather than deliver the final blow, he turned and walked off the battlefield. Menelaus survived, and Paris was eventually killed by Achilles. Following his death, it was decided that Helen would be married off to Paris's younger brother, Deiphobus.
One can only imagine how distraught Helen would have been, not only over the loss of her beloved, but immediately after being forced to marry a man she didn't know or love. With the death of one of their great warriors, the people of Troy had never been so against Helen. Even believing they had finally won the war couldn't sway their opinions of her.
The Trojans celebrated their victory while Helen, belonging nowhere between the wrath of Menelaus and the death of Paris, could do nothing but wait. Opening their gates, the Trojans brought in a massive wooden horse, thinking it a peace offering. Helen was not so certain. It said she circled the horse, copying the voices of the women in Sparta, trying to lure out the Spartans she knew were inside.
Before the Trojans knew what hit them, all hell broke loose. The Spartans were everywhere, inside the city, killing Trojans, burning buildings, and destroying everything they could. The sack of Troy had begun, and by the time it was over, little was left of the once beautiful city.
Menelaus eventually found Helen through all the chaos. At some point in time, he slew Deiphobus in order to make certain nobody else could say they had a claim to her. He brought her home, with delays in Egypt and due to unfavorable weather. When the two finally reached Sparta, another 10 years had passed. Helen's daughter Hermione was a full-grown woman, and many of Helen's people had turned against her. Helen and Menelaus ruled until his death. How Helen died is unclear. She may have died of old age, or have traveled to the island of Rhodes seeking friendship from a childhood playmate, Polyxo. However, Polyxo's husband had perished at Troy, and blaming Helen for the loss, Polyxo had her hung.
What a curse, to have such immense beauty, to be coveted by all, to be used as a political pawn all your life, to be fought for not because you were loved, but because you were a living trophy. Hers was a tragic life, really.